Thank you for tuning into Faces of Hope, a series brought to you by the St. Mary Ann Cope Shrine and Museum. Kate Mahoney leads us in candid conversations of hope and healing and inspiration from people who share the values of Mary Ann in their day-to-day lives and work. Today's episode, Calm Without a Canoe. Anwei Law is an author and historian. Her practice of storytelling bears in mind the dignity of every individual, and her reflections of Kalaupapa and its residents echo inclusivity and humility.
Anwei, it is so lovely to just see your face. It's been such a long time. So I have reflected during these times of isolation on our adventure in Kalaupapa and our work together and spending time with patients and caregivers. And I mean, also just being outside under those beautiful skies and the gentle wind and all of that. So when is the last time you were in Hawaii?
We were there last January, late
Okay.
January.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just kind of before everything started.
Yeah.
Or as it was starting and we didn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
What projects are you working on right now or continuing to work on?
Well, a few different things related to Kalaupapa.
Okay.
We're compiling the names for the Kalaupapa Memorial. So
Right.
that's what I was working on last January.
Yeah.
It's almost 8,000 names, and I finally got access to the final ones after 1933. So I've been pulling those together. And then also we're working on Mother Mary Ann's journal and Sister Leopoldina's journal. And it's been an interesting time to work on both of those projects.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot to be learned from them for what's going on now.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
a lot
Right
of
there.
support
I
from
mean,
those.
when I think about the investment of time and purpose you have given to memorializing, but giving the name to what was formerly unmarked, and not that it wasn't devalued because it wasn't marked, but how the experience and the history and the stories will be elevated by your work. I think that has such necessary impact for even people who aren't walking around like you and me today, but anybody who will start maybe tomorrow to learn the story of Mother Mary Ann, or how leprosy affected the community and how we've evolved into talking about infection control and Hansen's disease, and now having more tangible resource in the pandemic. So thank you just for everything you've given to this.
Well, thank you, but I'm just pulling it all together. It's all been, the tools have been left for us by those who came before.
Yes.
From, of course, Mother Mary Ann, Sister Leopoldina, but also the people of Kalaupapa. They've given us the tools, and it's just, we have to recognize the importance of those tools, and work to get them out there so that the history is balanced. Certainly when I started this many years ago, the history was not balanced. The people themselves weren't really represented, and the women, Mother Mary Ann, they weren't really represented.
Yeah.
So we're in a new time, but there's a lot of people working on this now to ensure that it's an inclusive history.
Yes.
Because inclusive history is always better history.
Could you talk a little bit about what sparked all of this for you? Because yes, I think there is maybe not a better, but there's more frequent awareness being communicated about Indigenous populations and Native communities, and having that dialogue around the necessity of inclusivity. You have talked the talk, walked the walk, shared it without ever forgetting that you are one piece within all of it. And I think that's really tremendous, because I do think a lot of people still sort of fall into that category of I've identified it and therefore perhaps I've solved something, rather than, no, this is what we should be doing all along. And so it isn't, you don't need to have a name in it. This is just about getting the work out there.
Yeah. Well, when I started looking at this particular history of Kalaupapa, I was 16 years old. It was in 1968. I first went to Kalaupapa when I was 16, and sort of was reading the history. The history was being written the way it's always been written. And I kind of started writing it that way too, and you just fall into what's there, not knowing what you don't know. And then, I kept going back, but probably in the 1970s, so I got to know the people, and that was very important, and become friends with people, and they would help me get photographs and tell me stories of people in the past. I wish there are many things now I wish I had asked, some of my preconceived ideas probably stopped me from asking things that I should have asked. And, but in the 70s, I started going around the country. I'd worked a lot at the Hawaii State Archives with their records, but I started going around the country for different archives. And I came to Syracuse, and I spent a month, and I had met Sister Eileen Griffin, who was at that point the mother superior, I guess we were calling her there. And because I had done a medical school interview with her. I went in for an interview, and there was Mother Mary Ann right above Sister Eileen. That was in Hawaii. And I thought, wow, of course, I didn't get into medical school. I'm rather glad of that. But she opened the door for me to come to Syracuse. She was there. And of course, I met Sister Mary Lawrence Hanley. And that changed everything. I had just been traveling around to Notre Dame and Wisconsin, reading hundreds of letters by Joseph Dutton. And like everybody else, was enamored by, he wrote all these letters. And she said, now, wait a minute, let me tell you a few things. And so we hopped a lot. And not only that time, I stayed with a wonderful family, the Braun Muellers, and would come over every day and just immersed myself in all that research that she and others had done. And it really was great and eye-opening on many fronts. And but the kindness too of the sisters, there were sisters there who had worked at Kalaupapa,
right.
And Sister Blanche would bring me coffee and cookies every day at 3. And when you're sitting looking at things, all day long, it's probably the only archives that serves you cookies and coffee.
Yeah,
it's dear to my heart. And I think that it did open the doors to really be communicating with Sister Mary Lawrence over the years, and learning through her, and and reevaluating again some of my preconceived ideas, including those about Joseph Dutton, which people should know now. I feel quite strongly about the fact that work done by others was often attributed to him, and she also was very strongly a voice for that. And that's how women get left out of history, because what they've done, it's one way, is attributed to the men who people assume did everything.
Yeah. Right.
So that started a very long relationship. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, even the phrases.
Anyway, it started a long relationship.
Yeah. I think we got a little time delay here. No. I want to go back for a second when you say your preconceived notions likely got in the way of questions you now, in retrospect, wish you would have asked. What are some of those questions?
What Ambrose Hutcheson looked like. Ambrose Hutcheson was at Kalaupapa from 1879 to 1932. And people, Johnny Canberra, who'd been there since 24, talked about him. He went and talked to him, but he'd been left out of this history. Ambrose Hutcheson had. Well, fortunately, he wrote his memoirs. That's why I say people left us the tools.
Yeah.
But we didn't really pay enough attention to it. And I often wish I had 5 minutes with Johnny Camber. We think we've identified Ambrose in photographs, just to say, is this right? Is this right? Tell me more. But I was too busy asking questions about the traditional, sort of people and traditional things.
Yeah.
And so I often wish I just had a little more time. I certainly talked to people about Mother Mary Ann and Father Damien and about other people who worked there. But like other people, I wasn't focusing on the people themselves who had the disease. I think I was in a lot of ways, but I had no idea, like other people, that there was all these documents written in Hawaiian, letters written from the very first people sent to Kalaupapa in 1866, talking about the situation because they were written in Hawaiian, and we were basically looking at the English language sources. But Agnes Conrad, who worked closely with Sister Mary Lawrence, when I was at the archives one day, gave me 10 letters that were written in Hawaiian. And she said, you need to be looking at these. And I looked at them, but I wasn't ready to really work on my book. And years later, when I came to Seneca Falls, and I saw a lot about how women had been left out of history, I pulled those letters out. And one was from a man named J.N. Loy, one of the first 12 people sent to Kalaupapa, and he was asking for a newspaper. And I said, he's asking for a newspaper. I hadn't paid attention because I wasn't old enough, I wasn't wise enough to pay attention. And I thought, he's not asking for food. He's not asking for a house. He's asking for a newspaper. And that totally changes your image of the people who were sent there. And the fact that the Hawaiians who were still living there took people in, gave them food, and cared for them for as long as they could till the numbers got too great. And that had been left out. But there it was. That one letter had the clue. So thanks to Agnes Conrad, that started me. And I was just sitting in my living room here in Seneca Falls and said, okay. And so then we started, I had a lot of people helping, and to get things written, or get the things that have been written in Hawaiian translated, at least some of them. Now so much more has been done. And it just makes the history obviously inclusive and richer and more accurate.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you mentioned this, and it reminds me of kind of the role of dramaturgy in theater as it relates to the character building and the storytelling, because it is, the social experiment, the level of education, what was happening in the world, so much leads into, I would like a newspaper. But you have to kind of want to delve into that. And it does sound like you have always been curious. And so every time something has been kind of put on your path, you have continued to be curious, And I think in that, the parallel I might draw, and I know you may not see this, but the parallel I draw with Mother Mary Ann is that she really paid attention as she met people where they were on every path she walked. And it was about cultivating the resources and getting that in. Now, what you or I might say could be viewed as a modern term to say women were left out of history, because I've talked to some of the older sisters in my time through my own experience being, 15 and 16 and 17. And it was like, I don't want to say they dismissed it, but there was sort of writing it in might give me attention and I don't need the attention. Do you know what I mean? And so finding the nuances of your work needs to be documented. And if you don't need the credit in the same way, we want to just acknowledge. So what are the varying degrees of kind of to prime time versus we're writing history and you are a part of that and that is worthy?
Yeah, and I think the other thing, yeah, absolutely. And, I think I should mention that in going through Mother Mary Ann's journal, I had done that years ago. And Sister Leopoldina's journal, I've gone through it at different times in my life. I spent 6 months going through Sister Leopoldina's journal when Sister Mary Lawrence was with us. And at that point, you know, again, my perspectives had changed some. And I realized that we could identify some of those girls, pictures of the girls that they were writing about, and women, because we were now looking at records and making the list for the memorial and doing all kinds of things. And we could bring this all together. And so there was also this thought that you can't find this in one place. So we would find the descriptions from Sister Leopoldina, go to the archives, you know, find a photo of someone and their name, and then we could connect the two, and that whole person would emerge. And I think that Mother Mary Ann had such a vision to make sure that these girls and women were not forgotten. And I think we don't see that from other people necessarily in the same way, but they wrote profusely about these girls and young women. And I think that, you know, Mother Mary Ann certainly gave Sister Leopoldina the journal, or a journal to start writing in. And I think that was also to help Sister Leopoldina. And I think when Mother Mary Ann was writing in her journal, I've been thinking about it a lot now because of COVID, because she was writing in this journal when they first got there, that had been started by Father Matthias, and then it kind of stopped, or there were just periodic things. But in 1900, she starts again. And 1900 and 1901, she starts writing. So why is that?
Right.
Why is that? And I've been thinking about that, and how, you know, she knew at that time that she would never be able to leave Kalaupapa again. She, I think it was a time of great sadness in many ways. It was a time when she really realized what people who were sent there had to go through, because there was no hope for her to leave because of her medical condition. So now she knew, and that separation from her community was permanent. And I think that that's why she wrote down people's names. We need people's names. When you know their names, you can go find other things. And Kalaupapa's history, there's a lot all over the place to find and to bring it all to life. But she wrote down those names and gave us bits of people's personalities by what they were asking for, needle and thread, or making lace and things like that. And of course, Sister Leopoldina gives very long descriptions of people. And I think those things also are very valuable to the people's family members.
Sure.
You know, and
Yeah.
we're finding things, because many family members are now coming out wanting information. And to know that they were taken care of in the Bishop home, I think is a great source of comfort. Because if you look at things now with COVID, you know, the whole thing of people not being able to be with families, you know, when they're sick. At Kalaupapa, this was for their life. This was for their life. And I think Father Damien realized it when he couldn't leave, because when he came down with leprosy. And Mother Mary Ann realized it when she could no longer leave because it was too dangerous for her to travel. And they understood what people were going through.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is, I'm almost entertained by the use of the word empathy that we are seeing so much more now. You know, there's a space for it. And I say entertained just because I think it's not a marginalized tool anymore. It's something that we all need to be more aware of. And whether it was articulated as such, Father Damien, certainly Mother Mary Ann, and so much of the population of Kalaupapa under her wings learned what it was to give and receive empathy in varying degrees. And I think that there's a wholeness that comes out of the Kalaupapa experience, despite such profound loss of life in the midst of that history and that era of illness.
Yeah, and I think also that's right. And I think what you see in these journals too is how much the people inspired them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Mother Mary Ann, after, unless there's something we haven't seen, and I can't imagine that, after about 1902 or into 1903, we don't have those journals anymore,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
And she doesn't seem to be writing in the same way.
Mm.
And maybe she's resolved or whatever, but also I think there's such she also gained so much from people. She was very good friends with Kapoli Kamakau, who had been very good friends with members of the royal family, who was a musician,
Mhm.
and we think helped or was part of composing the song Kalaupapa, which has always been said to be Mother Mary Ann's favorite song.
Yeah.
And I think these relationships help people. And the wonderful story Sister Leopoldina has about a woman named Kehealani Emakia, and how she was so sick. She was so sick for so many years. She really lived a long time. And when someone was so sick, they would often pray for that person, to be taken, by God and into the next world. But with Emakia or Kehealani Emakia, they prayed that she would live because she was such an example for
Mhm.
other people and a shining light. And so I think that and the sisters that I knew who were at Kalaupapa have memories of a woman named Toyo Kishimoto and how they felt she was a saint because of what she went through. And so I think that this was really a community. It was a community. And that's what got everybody through the
Mhm.
magnificence of the human spirit, being able to form a community amidst so much death and tragedy and just sadness. I mean, how many, in these journals, there always seem to be they're preparing them for death.
Right.
And these are also a lot of young girls,
Mhm.
and then, funerals and all these things. And, to just be looking at this. But also, Sister Leopoldina talks about sunshine and shadow.
Yeah.
There's the shadow of death, the sadness, but the sunshine. And the word sunshine comes first in what she writes,
Yeah.
because it was, the ability of people to deal with what had been dealt to them in a remarkable way,
Mhm.
as and to contribute to this community that now we look at as one of the most magnificent places in the world, one of the places where we can all be inspired through the relationships and the work that people did, and amid the fact that they weren't ever going to be able to leave.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, I could listen to you with this offering for hours because it is no, I'm not
I
trying
know.
to
I was
and
going to
I
say I
know.
can go on for hours, so
Yeah.
you better cut me off.
No, I mean it's that story of the people. And again, kind of my theater brain goes into like a Les Mis place where they all find one another and they rise together. And it doesn't have to be a power struggle framework. It really is just when people are put together, there are people who come together. They rise together, they celebrate, they live and die together. And to say that death and life are just normalized is to ignore the profound beauty in human connection, connection with land, connection with sun, connection with between the ohana, and understanding that there were different religions and different faiths in play that never separated the people. They bonded as people and informed and educated and celebrated one another through all of that. And of course, we know that there are women who became sisters and men who became priests because of the model of Mother Mary Ann. And then there are also people who simply because someone looked at them and validated a member of their family in one of the worst moments in their family's life or in history, now that person is empowered to keep giving care, and so it's like an epigenetic wonderment to me. I really think that's so fascinating. I have to know, in your research or in your conversations, what's something that has just really made you belly laugh or giggle? Because there is a lot of dark and heavy stuff that you cover, and there are lighthearted stories, but like there's got to be something that was just like hilarious. And I'm just wondering what that might be.
Well, I'm sure there are many things, but one came to me this summer when I was working on Sister Leopoldina's journal. And it was because I hadn't, I'd read this before, but I'd only paid attention to certain things.
Right.
But I really read it now, you know, and when she was traveling to Hawaii, there were on the ship, this were really rough. Mother Mary Ann had a terrible time with seasickness, but Sister Leopoldina went on a later one, and she felt she was young and strong, and she talked about how when she had to go down to her cabin, she slid down the banister of the ship. And I thought of this sister, there's a railing. I thought, here's Sister Leopoldina sliding, she said, for the first and last time in her life. And I thought, my goodness, well, she's going to the right place. She's resourceful. She had a sense of humor. And here she is, sliding down the banister of the ship or the railing. And that really made me laugh. There are a lot of other things, people at Kalaupapa, but that was something I learned recently.
Yeah. How old would she have been in that moment?
Wasn't she in her 20s or something?
Yeah. Okay. Right.
I'm thinking I'd have to go back and look, but she was 20s, late 20s maybe.
Yeah.
And and certainly in her habit, So imagine that, And So I think, but I think that they had a lot of there was a lot of joy, and I think that the other thing that one also has to really look at with Mother Mary Ann is that she didn't let other people know when she was having a tough time. Because there was also something Sister Leopoldina referred to, I don't have it exactly, but that she wondered if Mother Mary Ann was experiencing any difficulties, because it never seemed like it, because she was always helping other people get through those difficulties. And so I think that's where her journal comes in. That's where she wrote about it. Wrote about the difficulties and being sad, but she didn't have other people seeing that. And so that made it very hard, not to have that a person to really share that with, because she didn't want to bring them down. Well,
and I think, that's so interesting to juxtapose with current day, because I do think more conversations are being had about mental health, or you see the memes and things going around that say, check on your strong friend. So, I mean, this is like Sister Leopoldina's quandary is Mother Mary Ann is the strong friend, but she's like, where's the conversational element of that? And I do think sometimes people will see that model of everything seems fine and she doesn't talk about it. And so how do we process that trauma if for somebody verbal is not the most healing? She had the journal. And again, I think this is the model we have for mental health and coping skills, no pun intended, with Mother Mary Ann Cope, but she had journals. She had a way of expressing and managing stress through giving to others, or building relationships with young children and modeling what it is to see beauty in one another, and offering the rose water, or all these different things that range from fact to a little more folklore based on how stories have been handed down. But again, we can turn right back to history and see how these amazing women took care of themselves and one another and communicated in some way an awareness that it was hard, rather than just saying, yes, it's difficult, but we just put it under the rug. No, we don't. We find ways to acknowledge and process it, but sometimes we have to prioritize accordingly in different ways.
Yeah, and I think we also that's right, and I think we also have to be careful not to leave the men out of the history, because no, I'm just saying, because one of the things I've just been thinking about when I'm thinking of why did she not write too much in a journal after 1902? Well, and in 1902, you get two very good men, or Mr. McVeigh and Dr. Goodhue. They come to Kalaupapa there for 23 years. She worked very closely with Mr. McVeigh, who was the administrator. I interviewed his daughter, and she said that the name Mother Mary Ann was always on his lips and he would do anything for her. But she finally had someone in an administrative position who she worked with, and certainly he listened to her. And whereas a previous administrator, just when they would point out, the girls, they need poi, the people need poi, the Hawaiian staple, he said, let them learn to eat civilized food. But Mr. McVeigh got a poi factory made, so they were never short of that. So, and then Dr. Goodyear, they had doctors before, one took a lot of morphine, was kind of a nervous wreck. But with Dr. Goodhue, he did surgery on people. And Sister Leopoldina had to do some of those things herself, amputations and things. But they finally had people, they were getting good people there that certainly listened to Mother Mary Ann and worked with her. But it wasn't, everything wasn't, it was a partnership too. And the fact that she could work so well with those men said a lot. Everybody respected her. Everybody turned to her for wisdom and advice. But I do think that in that case, that maybe that's why, because things started getting a lot better, or maybe she became more resigned, and maybe she wasn't as sick. The fear of, the thing that amazes me is, when she's 1900, she's already been there 12 years. She's wondering, they're wondering how long she's going to be there, and she's still got another 18 years left.
Right.
How could she have handled that thought?
Yeah.
How could she? But she did it, and she was there, and really got the Kalaupapa at that time, because of this community that was built and the good people they were having there, becomes really the place in the world that everybody's looking to as a model. And so I think that we'll let the men come in sometimes here, but just make sure that they don't overshadow the women. And I wanted to mention something else too, because I remember as I started coming to Syracuse more, especially now I'm only an hour away. I'll always remember looking in the chapel one day, and there was Sister Roseanne Lamanche, and it was the birthday of Henry Hattori, who was a very good musician and a very good friend of hers at Kalaupapa. And she was there remembering him on that day. And he has long since passed away, but he was in her heart, as were many people. But there he was, and I just was so, inspired by seeing that, and she just never forgot. Never forget him. And I want to mention one other thing to you. It's interesting in this time of COVID, as I was starting to work on the names for the memorial, a few of the names, most of them are Hawaiian, but we have some translations for some of them. And the person helping me, we were looking at spelling, said, well, this is an interesting one, and she would say that. And there was an 80-year-old woman who was sent there in 1882. So this is pre-Mother Mary Ann. And her name translated into calm without a canoe. And I thought, what an incredible thing. And how can we all at this time be calm without a canoe? And I just thought that was incredible. And maybe in our lives, we have to always keep that in mind, because, and I think Mother Mary Ann managed to be calm without a canoe. And there was also a young girl who came the next year in 1883, and she was 15. And her name was translated the basis of the world. So here's an 80-year-old woman and a 15-year-old girl sent, within a year of each other. They both lived 3 to 5 years. But look at these names they had. And how incredible that is. And I'm not good at speaking these names, or I would be speaking them, but anyway, but I remember them. And I think that when we think about these things, so when I was working on this together with these journals earlier in the summer, these things were really inspiring, and certainly helped me at times when we weren't supposed to go out, and,
Yeah.
we didn't go out and things like that, to think about, what it would be like, what it was like to be, or to be named Calm Without a Canoe.
Oh my
And
goodness.
be at 80, sent to Kalaupapa at the age of 80,
Yeah.
you know.
Wow. I just have to take a minute for that. It's just amazing to me. Yeah.
And maybe that's what faith is.
Hmm.
It's to be calm without a canoe.
Yeah.
That's just something that just came to me.
Sure. Well, no, that's why we're here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're not wrong. I think that is for many people what that looks like. Yeah. If you've so expertly offered these different snippets of history and culture and women being written in and men having their place, and it shifts the narrative in such a great way. Is there a word that you gravitate to, or that speaks to your relationship with Mother Mary Ann after, or even now that you're still in this work that you're doing?
Well, I was thinking about that, because I think if you're going to describe her in different ways,
Mhm.
there are different words to describe her. Certainly inclusion, justice, kindness, caring, wisdom, all those kinds of things. But one of the things that strikes me is the word wind because when you go to her grave, there's often a wind.
Yes.
And you sit there and you can feel it. And there was a time when I was coming to Syracuse early on, and I had flown. I was living in Hawaii, and I'd been in the Chicago airport, and a plane next to mine had been on fire, and I was scared to death. And Sister Mary Lawrence proceeded to give me a piece of Mother Mary Ann's bookmark, which I still carry with me. And she said, you don't be afraid of this anymore. Don't be afraid. And maybe it's a ridiculous thing to do, but I've carried that with me for many years, and I'm so afraid in turbulence. I've traveled around the world, but later in my life, I become afraid.
Yeah.
And I'll often hold on to that when I'm in the wind, when I'm in the turbulence, to remember Mother Mary Ann and how, and often the turbulence stops. So, or it doesn't bother me anymore.
Yeah.
That's just kind of I don't know if it's silly or not, but it's just that thing. So when I go to Kalaupapa and I stand at her grave and I feel that wind, it's not something to be afraid of anymore.
Yeah.
It's something to just absorb and let be a part of you and your experience. And certainly at Kalaupapa, feeling the wind is very good, but you somehow feel her presence.
Very
so
much
I
so.
think that maybe it's kind of a silly thing, but
I don't think it's silly. I mean, I know, having had conversations around relics and understanding how important and significant and sacred they are is one component of that relationship. But I think about when my dad was in the hospital, one of the first times with major surgery, and we were at Mount Sinai, which has so many people coming and going. And I had the piece of bookmark belonging to Mother that I had that was given to me by Sister Mary Lawrence. And I had it in my back pocket, didn't think anything of it. And all of a sudden I couldn't find it. And I mean, I had all the other tools, like you spoke of when we started, to get me through this. But it was that I really felt I needed to have. And I was inconsolable. And I ended up going back down the elevator, down some flights of stairs, back into the cafeteria, and found it on the floor. And in that moment, I was like, I am supposed to have this. And that could seem silly too, but it brought me great comfort in this time where so much was unknown, because, you know, at that point, both my parents were sick and we really didn't know what the survival rates were going to be. We were gathering information. So if I needed to cling to something to bring me calm, that's what I needed to do, you know? I love to hear that that's something that's been with all your world travels, though. I mean, like the story, I feel like it could be a children's book where you take the little bookmark and see where it goes around the world, you know?
Well, and I have to say that I have held it closely at more significantly difficult times,
Sure.
including recent times. And I think that, but I also think Sister Mary Lawrence, she gave me something to have, to always remind me of the presence of Mother Mary Ann.
Yeah.
And, you know, and when you told me, you know, when we've talked about this too, I mean, I think that it was an incredible gift. And I often have dreams that I lose my purse and where I have it, and then I'm like, oh no, you know, and but I do carry it with me all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that helps me in ways I don't know.
Sure. Sure. Well, that's it. I mean, all of the things are true. There is past, there is present, there is future. We all do our best to weave them all together. But when crisis hits, the first reaction is not always to say, let me pull from my history, you know, or to say the future is unknown and there are things I don't know. It can be really destabilizing. So it is okay to have to, you know, grab at things in these moments, as well as step back once you're a little further into them or out of them or whatever that might look like. Yeah. Thank you so much for carving out a little time to celebrate the sisters who mean so much to both you and I, and certainly sharing part of the Hawaiian history and the epidemic elements of the story of Mother Mary Ann. I think you can speak to it in a way from your work that is different from other people joining this conversation. And I just think it adds so much more, and hopefully will continue to inspire people who are getting to know Mother Mary Ann or meeting her for the first day today, listening to us.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Yeah. She's a good person to know.
True story. Thank you, Anwei.
Thank you. It's great seeing you. It was
too.
wonderful to be with you at Kalaupapa. And hopefully we'll see each other again soon.
Definitely. Love ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.